The Mafia boss offered his hand, while her husband pretended not to know her. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The crystal chandelier above was a universe of captured stars, each facet scattering light across the gilded ballroom in a careless display of wealth. Ilara felt none of its warmth. She was an island in a sea of silk and champagne, a fixed point of stillness, while the currents of conversation and laughter flowed around her, deliberately avoiding her shores. Her husband, Julian, was the architect of this isolation. He stood not 20 feet away, the life of a small, glittering circle of admirers, his hand resting with casual possession on the bare arm of a woman whose laugh was as sharp and synthetic as the diamonds at her throat. He had not looked at Ilara, not once, since they had arrived. It was not a simple oversight. It was a statement, a public disavowal performed for the benefit of this audience of corporate predators and their elegant mates. She was a necessary accessory for an event of this caliber, but one he preferred to keep in the box. Her gown, a sheath of soft, liquid gold, felt like a mockery, a beautiful cage for a creature no one had any intention of seeing. She smoothed a hand over the fabric, the gesture small and self-soothing, her gaze drifting over the opulent crowd, seeing nothing but a reflection of her own profound loneliness. Then the sea parted. A silence, subtle but absolute, rippled outward from the grand entrance, a hush that followed a single man as he moved through the room. Dante Morty. His name was a whisper in rooms like this, a low thunder of rumor and fear that the city's elite pretended not to hear. He was not one of them. He was the foundation of power upon which their fragile empires were built, the dark, fertile soil from which their legitimate businesses grew. He moved with an economy of motion that was unnervingly graceful for a man of his size and reputation, his bespoke suit a shadow that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. The men who had been posturing and preening moments before suddenly found reasons to study their drinks, to adjust their cufflinks, their bravado evaporating in his presence. Women watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination, their eyes tracking him as a doe tracks a wolf. Ilara watched him too, but with a detached curiosity. He was a force of nature, an element entirely separate from the suffocating atmosphere of her life. He did not scan the room. His path was direct, his dark eyes fixed, and with a slow, dawning horror, Ilara realized they were fixed on her. Every step he took toward her was a drumbeat, each one drawing the attention of the entire room, tightening a knot of invisible energy around her. She could feel Julian's gaze on her now, a hot, possessive prickle on the back of her neck. He was looking at her, finally, but only because Dante Morty was. The thought was so bitter it almost made her flinch. Dante stopped before her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the icy void that usually surrounded her. He said nothing. The silence was his statement. In a room where everyone clamored to be heard, his quiet was a display of ultimate power. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable but his focus absolute, and in that single, weighted gaze, she felt more seen than she had in the 5 years of her marriage. Then he extended his hand. It was a large hand, impeccably clean, with a heavy gold signet ring on his smallest finger. It was an offer, a command, and a question all at once. A collective breath was held. To accept was a rebellion. To refuse was to shrink back into the shadows where Julian had placed her. She could feel her husband's fury across the room, a palpable wave of impotent rage. He would not intervene, not here, not with this man. His pride would not allow him to acknowledge that his wife was being taken from him, even for a dance. His inaction was its own form of cruelty, leaving her to face the wolf alone. Ilara looked at Dante's outstretched hand, then into his eyes. They were darker than she had imagined, and in their depths she saw not a predator but a man who understood the value of things others discarded. A flicker of defiance, long dormant, ignited within her. With a slow, deliberate grace that felt like breaking a vow, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and utterly confident. He drew her onto the dance floor as the orchestra, as if on cue, swelled into a slow, melancholic waltz. He pulled her close, his hand a firm pressure on the small of her back, and the world dissolved into a blur of gold and shadow. They moved as one, a silent, swirling testament to his choice. He had declared without a single word that she was worth being seen. And as they danced under the galaxy of the chandelier, with her husband watching, his face a mask of stiff, murderous jealousy, Alara felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she was. The music was a mournful, beautiful sound, a requiem for the life she had been living. Dante led with an assuredness that left no room for thought, only feeling. He did not make polite conversation or offer meaningless pleasantries. The dance was their dialogue. His grip was a promise of strength, the way he guided her a testament to his control. She rested her head against his shoulder for a fleeting moment, a gesture of surrender that felt more like a victory, breathing in the scent of expensive cologne, clean linen, and something else, something elemental and dangerous, like ozone after a lightning strike. When the final, lingering note of the waltz faded into the polite applause of the stunned onlookers, he did not release her immediately. He held her for a single, charged beat, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for the answer to a question he had not yet asked. "He does not deserve the gold you wear," Dante said, his voice a low, gravelly timbre that vibrated through her. It was the only thing he said to her all night. He then released her hand, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and walked away, the sea of people parting for him once more and then closing in his wake, leaving Alara standing alone in the center of the dance floor, the echo of his touch still burning on her skin. She was an island again, but now a beacon had been lit. The drive home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. The interior of the Bentley, usually a cocoon of quiet luxury, felt like a pressurized chamber, the air thick with Julian's unspoken rage. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape, his jaw a rigid line of fury. Alara stared out the window, watching the city lights smear into ribbons of neon and gold, the reflection in the glass showing a stranger with flushed cheeks and overly bright eyes. The woman who had left this house hours ago would not have dared to breathe in her husband's presence when he was like this. But the woman in the reflection felt a different kind of tension coiling in her gut, not fear, but a strange, thrilling anticipation. The memory of Dante Morti's hand in hers, the low timbre of his voice, was an armor she had not realized she was wearing until this very moment. When they finally swept through the wrought iron gates of their modernist prison, a house of glass and steel that had always felt more like a gallery for their perfect life than a home, Julian killed the engine, and the silence became absolute, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. He did not move to get out, but turned to her, his face a mask of cold fury in the dim light of the garage. "What did you think you were doing?" he finally hissed, his voice ablaze in the quiet. "Making a spectacle of yourself of me with that animal." Alara turned to face him, her composure a fragile shield. "He asked me to dance, Julian. It would have been rude to refuse." The lie was thin, and they both knew it. Her acceptance had been anything but polite compliance. It was a thrown gauntlet. "Rude," he scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. "You are my wife. Your only concern should be how your actions reflect on me. Do you have any idea who that man is? He is filth. He is the cancer of this city, and you let him put his hands on you in front of everyone, in front of my business partners, my rivals." He was not angry that another man had touched her. He was furious that another man had dared to claim what he considered his property, especially a man more powerful than himself. His anger was born of humiliation, not love. It was a wound to his ego, not his heart. The distinction was clarifying, cutting through years of carefully constructed denial. She had spent so long trying to earn a love that had never been on offer, only a transactional form of ownership. "You pretended not to know me," she said, her own voice quiet but carrying a weight that surprised even her. "You stood with another woman on your arm and looked through me as if I were glass. He was the only person in that room who made me feel like I was there at all." Julian's face contorted, a flash of genuine shock warring with his anger. He had grown so accustomed to her silent acceptance of his neglect that her words were like a physical blow. He reached out, grabbing her arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow. "Do not mistake a predator's interest for kindness, Alara. A wolf singles out a lamb for one reason only. You have made a grave mistake and you have put my affairs in jeopardy. Stay away from him. Do you understand me? You will not see him, you will not speak to him. You will go back to being the wife you are supposed to be." His threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. He was right about the danger, she knew that. Dante Morti was not a safe man. But the life she was living, this slow, suffocating death in a gilded cage, was not safe either. It was just a different, more insidious kind of peril. He released her arm, leaving the faint impression of his fingers on her skin, and got out of the car, slamming the door behind him. Alara remained, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked down at her arm, at the faint red marks, and then thought of the firm, steady warmth of Dante's hand. Julian's touch was a brand of ownership. Dante's had been a gesture of recognition. Days later, a delivery arrived. It was not sent to the house, where Julian's staff would have intercepted it, but to the small office she kept at the charitable foundation she chaired, her one approved and sanitized escape from her domestic prison. It was a simple, long box, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a single, perfect branch of night-blooming cereus, a flower that blossoms only once a year in the dark and then dies by morning. It was impossibly beautiful and achingly ephemeral. There was no card, no note, but she knew with an instinct that felt as old as time who had sent it. It was not a courting gift. It was a message. He saw her. He understood her. He knew she was a creature who had been forced to bloom in the dark, unseen. It was the most intimate gesture she had ever received, a silent acknowledgement of her soul's deepest truth. Julian's threats echoed in her mind, but they sounded distant now, like the warnings of a man who had no comprehension of the forces he was trying to command. Alara traced a finger along one of the flower's waxy, white petals. It was a choice, she realized. The beautiful, sterile, and perpetual prison of her life with Julian, or the dangerous, fleeting, but truly seen existence offered by Dante. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she found the unlisted number a discreet inquiry had provided her days ago. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she made her first true decision in years and stepped out of the cage. The address she was given led her to a place she never would have expected, a private antiquarian bookstore in a quiet, cobblestoned corner of the city that had resisted the relentless march of modern steel and glass. The air inside smelled of aging paper, leather, and lemon polish, a sanctuary of stories and forgotten time. A bell chimed softly as she entered, and a man with silver hair and scholarly glasses looked up from a massive, leather-bound tome, giving her a small, knowing smile before gesturing toward a spiral staircase in the back. "Mr. Morty is waiting for you in the reading room upstairs," he said, his voice as soft as dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. The room at the top of the stairs was a haven of quiet masculinity, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books, a fire crackling in a marble hearth, and two deep leather armchairs positioned near the warmth. Dante Morty was standing by the window, looking down at the street below, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He turned as she entered, and the full force of his presence was somehow more potent here, away from the distracting glitter of the gala. He was not just a powerful man, he was an intelligent one. This room, this place, was a testament to that. "Mrs. Davies," he said, his voice that same low rumble. He did not smile, but his eyes held a flicker of something that might have been approval. "Thank you for coming." Alara felt a nervous tremor run through her, but she stilled it, lifting her chin. She was here by her own choice, and she would not present herself as a frightened child. "The flower was beautiful, Mr. Morty, though I confess I'm not sure what it was meant to say." He gestured to the empty armchair. "Please." She sat, smoothing her simple wool dress over her knees, feeling suddenly plain after the gilded armor of the gala. He took the seat opposite her, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face, making his eyes seem even darker. "It meant," he said, leaning forward slightly, his gaze intense, "that I understand that the most beautiful things are often the most overlooked, and that they frequently bloom under the harshest conditions." His directness was a disarming thing. There were no layers of polite society to peel back. He presented the truth, stark and unadorned. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Why me?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her since the moment he had offered his hand. "In a room full of powerful people, of beautiful women, why did you walk over to me?" He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because power in that room is an illusion. It is stock prices and social standing, things that can vanish overnight. The women are ornaments, trained to be beautiful and silent. You were silent, yes, but your silence was not one of submission. It was one of observation, of judgment, I saw a queen sitting alone in a forgotten corner of her own court, and I felt it was a dereliction of duty for no one to acknowledge her. The words settled deep inside her, a balm on a wound she had not even realized was still open. He had not seen a victim. He had seen a queen. He was offering her a crown, but she knew it would be a heavy one, forged in fire and shadow. "My husband," she began, the words tasting like ash, "believes your interest in me is predatory, that you are a wolf and I am a lamb." Dante set his glass down on the small table between them, the sound a quiet, definitive click. "Your husband is a man who keeps his prize lamb in a pen and starves it, all while boasting of its fine fleece. I am a wolf, Mrs. Davies, that is true, but wolves are loyal to their pack. They protect their own with a ferocity your husband could never comprehend. I am not offering you a safer cage. I am offering you the freedom of the forest. It is a dangerous place, but it is a real one. And you would not be alone." The air crackled with the weight of his offer. This was not a flirtation, not a seduction in the traditional sense. It was a recruitment, a coronation, an invitation into a world where the rules were different, brutal but honest. At that moment, the door to the bookstore downstairs chimed again, followed by a low, urgent murmur of voices. Dante's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, a subtle tightening around his eyes. A moment later, his silver-haired associate appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale. "Sir," he said, his voice tight, "there is a problem, men asking for you. They are not our friends. They mentioned Mr. Davies." Julian, he had done something stupid, something desperate. Alara's blood ran cold. She had underestimated the depths of his panicked, possessive rage. Dante's eyes locked on hers, and in them she saw not alarm but a cold, calculating resolve. The danger he had spoken of was no longer a metaphor, it was downstairs, and it had her husband's name attached to it. Dante stood, his movements fluid and unhurried. He walked not to the door but to a section of bookshelf, pressing a hidden latch. A panel of books swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. "It seems your husband has made a choice for you, Alara," he said, using her first name for the first time. It sounded like a vow. "The forest is now at your door. You can stay here and wait for the zookeepers to arrive, or you can run with me." He extended his hand, just as he had in the ballroom. An offer of salvation, of damnation, of a life she could never have imagined. The choice was the same, but the stakes were infinitely higher. This time, she did not hesitate. She put her hand in his and followed him into the dark. The passage was narrow and smelled of cold stone and dust, a secret artery running through the heart of the old building. Dante moved with a familiarity that spoke of contingency plans layered upon contingency plans, his grip on her hand, a grounding, inescapable reality. He led her down a tight spiral of stone steps into what appeared to be a wine cellar, its racks filled with priceless vintages that were likely the least valuable things in the room. He did not pause, heading for a heavy, iron-banded door at the far end, which opened not into another room, but into a clean, modern, underground garage. A sleek, black sedan sat waiting, its engine already humming a low, powerful thrum. A man stood beside it, broad-shouldered and impassive, his suit just as immaculate as Dante's. He opened the rear door without a word as they approached. "Marco will see that you are safe," Dante said to Alara, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of tightly controlled violence. "There is a matter I must attend to personally." He was going to handle the men Julian had sent. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her, but it was fear for him, a shocking and unfamiliar sensation. "What will you do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He paused, his hand on the car door, and turned to look at her, his expression grim. "I will remind your husband that when you send dogs into a wolf's den, you do not get them back." The finality in his tone was absolute. He was a king dealing with an insolent peasant who had dared to trespass on his lands. He helped her into the car, the leather of the seat cool against her skin, and for a moment, his face softened as he looked at her. "Go with Marco. You will be safe. I promise you." He closed the door, and the world outside became muted, the heavy silence of the luxury vehicle a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding above them. As the car pulled away, slipping into an anonymous tunnel that led out into the city's traffic, Alara looked back. The last thing she saw was Dante Morty, standing under the bare bulb of the garage, a dark, immovable figure preparing to unleash a storm. She was no longer just a neglected wife. She was the cause of a war, a pawn who had suddenly become the queen on a very dangerous chessboard. The drive was silent, Marco navigating the city with an expert's ease, his eyes constantly scanning, his presence a silent wall of professional protection. They arrived not at a penthouse or a flashy mansion, but at a discreet, elegant brownstone on a tree-lined street, a place that blended in perfectly with the old money that surrounded it. Inside, however, was a fortress. The windows were subtly reinforced, the doors were solid oak and steel, and a quiet, formidable woman named Sophia greeted them at the door. She was older, with silver threaded through her dark hair and eyes that held a lifetime of secrets. She looked at Alara not with pity or suspicion, but with a simple, profound respect. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm. "Everything is prepared for you. Mr. Morty instructed that you are to have anything you need." Sophia led her to a suite of rooms on the second floor that were the antithesis of the cold, minimalist house she had shared with Julian. The furniture was old wood, polished to a deep sheen, the fabrics were rich velvets and silks, and the bed was a vast, inviting expanse of white linen. It was a room that felt lived in, safe, a sanctuary. Alara spent the next few hours in a state of suspended disbelief, packing the plush Obasan rug, a prisoner in a far more comfortable cage. Sophia brought her a light meal and tea, treating her like an honored guest, not a refugee. The quiet of the house was unnerving. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant city sound made her jump. She was waiting, though, for what she was not sure. For news, for Dante's return, for Julian's men to somehow breach these walls. The sun began to set, painting the room in hues of orange and violet, when she finally heard the front door open and close. She stood frozen, her heart in her throat, listening to the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs. The door to her room opened, and Dante stood there. He looked weary, the iron control he normally projected showing the slightest hint of fatigue around his eyes. There was a small, almost invisible cut on his cheekbone, a stark, dark line against his pale skin. He had shed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and covered in the faint, intricate lines of old tattoos. He said nothing, simply walking into the room and closing the door behind him. The air was thick with unspoken questions. He crossed to the small bar cart in the corner and poured 2 glasses of the same amber liquid he'd been drinking in the bookstore. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "It is done," he said, his voice raw. "Your husband's messengers have been returned to him with a clear understanding that his business in this city is concluded. He will not trouble you again." The words were simple, but the meaning was immense. He had not just neutralized a threat, he had dismantled Julian's life, his power, his reputation, all in the space of a few hours. He had done it for her. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. He gave a short, dismissive shake of his head. "Protection is not something to be thanked for. It is a duty." He walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. He did not value you, so he valued nothing. A man who cannot protect what is most precious to him deserves to have everything else taken away. She came to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body, to see the tension in his shoulders. "And what happens now?" she asked softly. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the twilight. "Now you are free, you can leave. I can arrange for you to go anywhere in the world, a new life, a new name. You will be safe, and you will never have to see me or this life again." It was a genuine offer. He was not a jailer, replacing one cage with another. He was giving her the choice he had promised, the freedom of the forest. And in that moment, looking into the eyes of this dangerous, complicated, and honorable man, Alara knew she did not want to run. She had been running her whole life, running from loneliness, from insignificance. She was tired of running. "And the other choice?" she asked, her voice steady. His gaze intensified, and he took a half step closer, closing the small space between them. "The other choice," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur, "is that you stay. You stay with me. It will not be an easy life. There will always be shadows, but you will never be invisible again. You will stand by my side, not behind me, not beneath me, beside me." He reached out, his hand coming up to cup her jaw, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. His touch was not possessive but reverent. It was the touch of a man who had found something priceless. "I chose you in that ballroom, Alara, not as a prize but as a partner, a queen." All the fear, all the uncertainty that had churned inside her, finally settled. This was real. This man, this life, this feeling of being utterly and completely seen was real. She leaned into his touch, a silent answer to his unasked question. His eyes searched hers for a moment longer, and then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of frantic passion, but of deep, resonant certainty. It was the sealing of a pact, a promise of loyalty, a coronation. In the heart of a fortress, surrounded by the shadows of his world, Alara finally felt like she had come home. The kiss deepened, a slow, consuming fire that burned away the last remnants of her old life, leaving in its wake a terrifying and beautiful new reality. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the room was dark, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars outside the window. Dante rested his forehead against hers, his breathing a steady rhythm against the frantic beating of her own heart. He had not just offered her a hand, he had offered her a kingdom, and she had just accepted the crown. The days that followed were an education. Life with Dante Morti was a series of quiet rituals and unspoken rules, a world that operated on its own axis of loyalty and consequence. He did not hide the nature of his business from her, but presented it as one with the management of any vast and complex empire. There were meetings in the library with men whose faces were hard and whose deference to Dante was absolute. There were late-night phone calls where his voice would drop to that cold, commanding tone she had heard in the garage. But there were also quiet evenings by the fire, where he would read from the old books that lined his shelves, his voice a soothing cadence in the still room. He shared stories of his childhood, of the brutal code of honor that had shaped him, revealing the man beneath the fearsome reputation. In turn, Alara found her own voice, speaking of her own gilded cage, the years of quiet desperation, the intellectual and emotional starvation. He listened with an intensity that made her feel as though her words were the most important thing in the world. He was not just her protector, he was her confidant, her student, and her teacher. Her husband, Julian, was dealt with not through overt violence, but with the silent, suffocating precision of a master strategist. News began to trickle through the financial papers of a sudden, catastrophic collapse of Davies Corporation. Key investors pulled out, federal investigators began to circle, and damning evidence of fraud and embezzlement mysteriously found its way to the press. Julian, the man who had preened and postured at the center of the city's elite, became a pariah overnight. His friends abandoned him, his assets were frozen, and his name became a synonym for disgrace. Dante never spoke of it directly, but Alara saw the grim satisfaction in his eyes when he read the morning paper. He had not killed the man. He had annihilated his world, leaving him a ghost in the society he so desperately craved. It was a fate, Alara knew, that for a man like Julian was far crueler than death. She felt no pity, only a distant sense of justice, a closing of a chapter that had almost consumed her. Her own transformation was a quieter, more internal revolution. Sophia, the formidable housekeeper, became a quiet ally, teaching Alara the rhythms of the house and the subtle dynamics of Dante's inner circle. Marco, the silent driver, began to greet her with a respectful nod that held a hint of warmth. She was no longer the fragile outsider. She was becoming the lady of the house, the Regina, as Sophia once called her in a hushed, reverent tone. Her intelligence, so long suppressed, began to flourish. She started reading the financial reports and case files that Dante would sometimes leave on his desk, and soon they were discussing them. She had a keen eye for detail and a natural understanding of human motivation that Julian had always dismissed. Dante, however, saw its value. He began to solicit her opinion, first on small matters, then on larger strategic decisions concerning his more legitimate business fronts. She was not just his consort, she was becoming his counselor, his partner in a way she had never dreamed possible. She was earning her place at his side, not through beauty or birthright, but through her own formidable intellect and character. One evening, about a month after she had come to him, Dante took her to a small, private dinner at a restaurant he owned, a place tucked away in an old brick building that served the best food in the city to a clientele that knew not to ask questions. It was the first time they had been out in public together since the gala. As they entered, the low hum of conversation stilled. The men at the tables, dangerous men with reputations of their own, rose to their feet as Dante passed, their eyes flicking to Alara with a mixture of curiosity and profound respect. Dante guided her to a secluded corner booth, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He was not showing her off, he was presenting her. This was her formal introduction to his world, to his people. He was showing them their queen. "They feared you would be my weakness," he said, his voice low as he leaned across the table after they had ordered. "A beautiful distraction, an outsider who could not be trusted. And what do they think now?" she asked, meeting his gaze. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips, a rare and devastatingly handsome sight. "They see what I see," he said, "my greatest strength." The weight of his words, the public declaration of her new status, settled over her. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, unwavering certainty. She belonged here, in this world of shadows and honor at this man's side. After dinner, they did not go straight home. Dante had Marco drive them to a high point overlooking the city, a place where the endless sprawl of lights looked like a blanket of scattered jewels. They got out of the car, the cool night air a welcome caress. They stood in silence for a long time, looking down at the kingdom below them. "Do you miss it?" he asked, his voice quiet. "The galas, the polite lies, the illusion of safety." Alara thought of the cold, glittering ballroom, of Julian's dismissive laugh, of the profound emptiness that had been her constant companion. She thought of the woman in the gold dress, a beautiful ghost haunting her own life. That woman was gone, and she did not mourn her. "I was more in danger in that ballroom than I have ever been with you," she said, turning to face him. "You didn't just offer me your hand that night, Dante. You offered me my life." He reached for her, pulling her into his arms, his embrace a circle of warmth and strength against the vast, dark night. She wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him tightly, the solid beat of his heart against hers the only sound that mattered. This was not a fairy tale ending, but something far more real, more potent. The danger would always be a part of their lives, a shadow that walked beside them, but they would face it together. He was the city's dark king, and she, the forgotten queen he had seen and crowned. Looking out over the glittering, sleeping city, a world he controlled and she now understood, Alara knew she was finally, truly home. Their love was not a soft, easy thing. It had been forged in defiance, tempered by danger, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and absolute loyalty. It was a love that was earned, and it was a love that would last, a burning, constant light in the heart of the coming darkness. He was her king, and she was his queen, and together they would reign. 2 years had passed since the night Dante Morty had pulled her from the wreckage of her life, and the silence that now filled the library of their brownstone was of a different quality altogether. It was not the cold, empty silence of a loveless marriage, but the deep, comfortable quiet of two people who existed in perfect concert, whose thoughts and breaths seemed to have found a shared rhythm. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, dancing light over the spines of 1,000 books and the rich, dark wood of Dante's desk. He sat behind it, not working, but watching her as she stood by the tall window, tracing the patterns of frost that had bloomed on the cold glass. She had changed. The haunted fragility was gone, replaced by a serene, unshakable confidence that had settled deep in her bones. She wore his love and his protection like a second skin, but the strength that radiated from her was entirely her own. She was no longer the queen he had crowned in a moment of defiance. She was the queen who reigned beside him, her counsel as valued as that of any of his capos, her intuition a weapon he had come to rely on as much as his own fearsome reputation. She turned from the window, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips as she caught his gaze. He never tired of looking at her, of marveling at the woman who had bloomed so brilliantly once she was free of the sterile soil in which she had been planted. "You look at me as if you are still trying to solve a puzzle," she said, her voice a low, melodic sound that never failed to soothe the rougher edges of his soul. He rose from his chair, his movements as fluid and silent as always, and came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his gaze following hers out into the walled garden where bare, snow-dusted branches sketched dark lines against the bruised twilight sky. "You are not a puzzle, Alara," he murmured into her hair, his voice a gravelly whisper meant only for her. "You are the answer." To a question I did not even know I was asking. She leaned back into his embrace, her hand coming up to rest on his, her fingers lacing with his over the soft cashmere of her dress. They stood like that for a long moment, watching the evening draw its dark cloak over the city, a king and queen in their quiet fortress. "Good," she said softly, a note of profound contentment in her tone. "Because our life is about to become much more complicated. There is going to be a third person joining us for these quiet evenings." Dante went still. The world, which had for 2 years been a universe that revolved entirely around the two of them, suddenly, shockingly, tilted on its axis. He slowly turned her in his arms to face him, his hands moving to frame her face, his dark eyes searching hers for confirmation of the impossible thing she had just said. He saw it there, in the soft, luminous glow of her expression, in the unwavering steadiness of her gaze. His heart, a tightly guarded organ that had beat a steady, controlled rhythm for 40 years, hammered against his ribs with a force that stole his breath. He, a man who had faced down death and betrayal without flinching, was utterly undone by a single sentence. A child, an heir, a son or daughter born not of obligation or dynastic arrangement, but of a love so fierce it had defied 2 separate worlds. He lowered his forehead to hers, a tremor running through his large frame as the reality of it washed over him. He felt a surge of possessive, primal joy so potent it was almost painful, followed swiftly by a wave of fear colder and deeper than any he had ever known. His life was one of constant, managed danger, a chess game played with men's lives. To bring a child, his child, Alara's child, onto that board was to introduce a vulnerability he had never before had to consider. He slid his hands down from her face, down her arms, to her still flat stomach, spreading his palms over the place where a new life, their life, was taking root. The gesture was one of awe, of reverence, of absolute, terrifying ownership. "Our child," he said, the words thick with an emotion he could not name. It was not a question, but a vow. A month later, they stood in the foyer of their home, preparing to attend the annual acquisitions gala for the City Museum, the same event that had served as the backdrop for the beginning of their story. The contrast was a chasm that spanned a lifetime. Alara was not in a gown of soft, supplicating gold, but in a sheath of velvet the color of dark wine, a dress that did not apologize for her presence but announced it. It was elegant, severe, and utterly commanding. Dante watched her fasten a diamond earring, his expression one of deep, abiding pride. He stepped forward, holding a small, velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a necklace of antique diamonds, heavy and intricate, with a single, perfectly cut ruby at its center that seemed to pulse with its own inner fire. It was a Morty heirloom, a piece worn only by the matriarch of the family. As he fastened it around her neck, the cold weight of it settling against her skin, it felt less like a gift and more like the final piece of her coronation armor. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck, a brief, possessive touch that sent a shiver through her. "They will not know whether to bow or to run," he said, his lips brushing her ear. "It is my favorite thing about you." She met his gaze in the grand, gilt-edged mirror, her eyes alight with a fire that matched his own. Let them do both. Their entrance into the glittering ballroom was not a quiet parting of the sea, but a tidal wave of silence and deference. The whispers did not follow them. They died as they approached. Men who had once looked through Alara now met her gaze with a carefully masked fear, their wives with a mixture of envy and awe. She was no longer Julian Davies' beautiful, invisible wife. She was Alara Morty, and her name carried a weight that could crush fortunes and end careers. Dante guided her through the room, his hand a permanent, warm presence at the small of her back, a silent warning and a public claim. They passed a small group of financiers, and she heard a name from her past. Julian. The man speaking mentioned having seen him in a small, forgettable European city, working a menial job, his name and face so altered by disgrace and desperation that he was barely recognizable. A ghost. Dante's justice had been poetic and absolute, erasing the man not from life, but from the world he had worshipped. Alara felt nothing, not a flicker of pity or triumph. He was a footnote in a book she had long since finished reading. Her story, the real story, was the man beside her, and the future they were building, a future she could feel as a faint, fluttering promise deep within her. Later that night, back in the sanctuary of their library, the scent of the cold night still clinging to their clothes, Dante poured them both glasses of mineral water. He was quiet, a thoughtful, brooding stillness about him that Alara had come to recognize. He handed her a glass and led her not to the chairs by the fire, but to the great window that looked out over the city. The endless constellations of light spread out below them, a kingdom of glass and steel, of secrets and power. "I saw them watching you tonight," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They see a queen, but I see the woman I love, and I wonder if I have done the right thing bringing you into all of this." He gestured to the city below. "And now, a child, our child. Is it right, Alara, to bring an innocent life into a world that is anything but, to give our enemies a target that is more precious than our own lives?" It was the first time she had ever heard him voice a genuine fear, a crack in the invincible facade, and it made her love him all the more. This was not the fear of a mafia boss for his legacy, but the fear of a father for his child. Alara set her glass down and turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. His were large and warm, capable of both breathtaking gentleness and brutal finality. She held them tightly, her gaze clear and resolute. "The world I came from was not innocent, Dante. It was just a different kind of predatory. It was a place that starved the soul instead of threatening the body. It was a beautiful, sterile cage. Our child will never know a cage." She reached up, her hand stroking the hard line of his jaw. "Yes, there is darkness in this life. There is danger, but there is also honor. There is loyalty, and there is a love that most people in that ballroom tonight cannot even comprehend. Our child will not be raised in fear of the shadows. They will be raised to understand them, to command them. They will be protected by a wolf and a queen who would burn down the entire world for them. They will be stronger for it, not weaker." "This," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce, loving whisper, "is the only world in which our child could ever have been conceived. They belong here, with us." A profound sense of peace settled over him, chasing away the last of the shadows of his doubt. She was right. She was his strength, his partner, his queen, and she would be the fiercest of mothers. He pulled her against him, his embrace enveloping her completely, one hand splayed protectively over her abdomen. This was his world, his family, his future. The city lights below seemed to fade into insignificance, their cold fire no match for the warmth of the life they held between them. He kissed her then, a deep, possessive kiss that was not about beginnings or defiance, but about the enduring, unshakable truth of their union. It was a promise of forever, a pact sealed not just for themselves, but for the dynasty they would build. He had offered his hand to a lonely woman in a golden gown, and in return she had given him everything, a love that anchored his soul, a partnership that sharpened his mind, and now, a future that would carry their legacy into the generations to come. They were Dante and Alara Morty, and their reign was just beginning.